Today's camera, Voigtlander Vitessa T. This one has seen better days. There's a fair bit of signs of light corrosion around the place. Screw head's rusty there, for example, things of that nature. Anyway, its main and headline problem is that the shutter doesn't work, or doesn't work reliably. Interchangeable lens on this camera, decal mount, but it's not the same decal mount that's used on the Retina Reflex S type cameras. In particular, you'll see that the aperture settings ring is on the lens, it's not on the body. So you can't move them from one to the other. So here's our camera body. Now the Vitessa models you may be familiar with, or you may not. They have a plunger to advance the film and cock the shutter, and then shutter release here, of course. And the shutter there worked for us that time. What's that set to a 30th? Let's try it 125th. Stuck. Those blades didn't close completely. Yeah, you can see that. That's very unusual behaviour for a shutter to work at a lower speed than a higher speed. There you go, that one's set to a quarter. You can see that's never going to close. That's just in a state of suspended animation there. So, what am I going to do with this? Well, I'm going to start by removing the front of the camera and servicing the shutter. I'll sort of do this in stages. I am going to do the camera body as well, but I thought I might just as well start with the shutter. So that's what we'll do. First I'll open the back of the camera. There's a key on the base, just rotate that. And the back slides that away. Pressure plates attached to the back on this camera. Not much to see there. It's got the frame counter inside here. The window is yellow. The windows are always yellow. I'm sure they didn't start that way, but at this late stage they're all yellow. We've got 4 screws here, which I believe will hold our whole lens mount assembly on the front of the camera. At least that's the way I remember it. We'll find out if I'm right. Let's see how we get on. It's been a while since I've done one of these. I'm taking note of whether the screws are all the same length or not, and I see that they're not. The one here was a shorter screw and smaller in diameter, so I shouldn't be able to mix them up easily. The other 3, these 3 were all the same. This was a short screw, smaller diameter. Let's flip it over and see if this front will lift off. It does. But something is caught. What's caught? No, it's lifting out. Right, there's our front, and here's our body. We have the baffle here, which is once upon a time was glued in there, and that's broken away. But that should be no hardship to deal with. I'll pop the body to one side now, I suppose. And I'll come back to that later. Let's have a look at this. Well, I'm looking here to see how the shutter is held to the front of this housing here. I can see a screw head here, one in here, it's not, oh, and there's one down here. I was wondering why we were so unbalanced, and in fact there's one over here as well. There's a flash connection here with two pieces of spaghetti on it, and I think I'll break the flash connection at this point. And hopefully be able to lift out the wire back through that hole and away. So first I'll go away to the soldering station and desolder that wire. Right, that part's done. See if I can pull that wire through the housing there, just so that it's all on the same side, and we'll presumably pull straight out with the shutter. Now, 4 screws I identified, hadn't I? One there, one down here, one here, and one over here. Okay, I think that's all I need to note. Is there anything here? There's no timing or anything I need to be aware of. Just take that piece of spaghetti off that wire, and hopefully the shutter will pull off the front here now. It does. There's our screws falling out from the back. That was 3 of them. Was the 4th one not falling? Oh, it's tucked behind that piece there. Let's get that out so it's not, doesn't get lost. That's reluctant to come out. Those screws all appear to be identical. Okay, I'm going to put this aside. There's a loose cam on the front here. I'm making sure I don't lose that. Let's just pop that piece over there. The lens down there. Let's have a look at this shutter. Well, first thing I want to do is get rid of this piece of spaghetti from here and remove the flash contact at this point. Now the insulation on this wire is pretty ratty looking. I may choose to replace that completely. I'm going to desolder that because there's no danger that that wire is going to stay in place while I'm servicing it. It's much more likely I'll end up with the wire actually breaking anyway. Back shortly. Well, so far so good. Let's just put that ratty looking bit of wire over there. Look at the shutter. We've got a cam on the back here that couples to the front of the camera, and that's where the shutter would be cocked. Here's our rangefinder coupling pin here. That's trapped in here. From the back, I'd say. There's a keeper on there, a spring or something that acts as a keeper to stop that thing from coming out. probably needs to come off. Oh, we'll find out in due course. Okay, so we'll start here. Let's lift that little cam off the back. That does just lift off. Looking at the position of the screws here, we've got 3 different screws. This one's a small countersunk head screw, presumably because that comes up against somewhere on the mount and a raised head wouldn't suit. Right, let's get that off here. So 3 screws hold the shutter to the front of the shutter mount, the lens mount if you like. Is it 3 screws or 4 screws? 4. That one's a little bit chewed up looking. I'm just checking that they're all identical. Fortunately they are. Let's see if this will lift off here. Yeah, it does. Okay, so that's our lens mount section there. I'll take that down and clean it later, but the core of the shutter I'm more interested in at this point. So that keeper, which is just for all practical purposes, just a fine spring around that thread there on there, that's will probably unscrew. Just depends how tight it is. I don't really want to grab at it with a pair of pliers because I might end up damaging it. It was either screwed on or pushed on. There's fine screw thread that runs round that pin, almost certainly that's not going to want to come out. Well, it's got to come off one way or the other. It's odd, I've serviced these before, I don't remember seeing that, so that is probably some minor change in production that brought about that. Alright, I'll see if I can get that thing unscrewed from here. I think a little bit of solvent on there might be a good thing to start with, because it may well be that it's had a touch of something on there to help it stick. But it is just a fine spring, and the screw is effectively screwed into the fine spring. What a weird thing. Don't know why someone wouldn't just use a C-clip or something like that in that situation. Well, to help me unscrew this, I'm going to get a pin vise onto the front of this shaft so I can grip it, and then I'll use a pair of pliers on the spring to hold it while I unscrew it from the front. That's the theory. We'll see if it works out in practice. Right, so I've got to find the right collet for my pin vise. That one there will do nicely. Okay, so now I can unscrew that spring arrangement, hopefully, with my pliers on that spring. Let's just see if this will do it. I don't dare crush that spring too much because I'll never be able to get the damn thing back on. Yeah, it is working. Right, let's try with my fingers now. Yeah, it's off. That tiny little loop there is a very, very fine spring. And basically, its purpose is to stop this pin from being able to exit back out from the front of the shutter. What was that muck? Don't know. Okay, so complications aside, now we can look at the shutter. Now the shutter should be very similar to other shutters like in the Retina 3S rangefinder and things of that nature. And I'm not expecting to find too many odd surprises in here. So the front retainer ring, let's get this off. Now usually there's a little gap here, which means you can get your tweezers into that hole and spring that thing loose. That's the front retainer ring off. The shutter speed setting cam ring, and into the shutter itself. Well, there's the cocking shaft that came through from the back. The internal cocking ring, if you like. Let's take that off, unhook it from its post. There's our shutter release. That spring looked pretty anemic. It was probably enough to do the job. Something odd here. What's that? I know it's just the arrangement of the spring at this point is unusual. It's certainly something I've seen before in Compur shutters. It's just not something I'm familiar with seeing frequently. I'll show you that in a second. I'll just remove the retard gear train. The self-timer. I'll cock the shutter and remove the retard gear train next. So I'll swing that arm across to latch that mechanism. Cock the main drive cam. It allows me the arms to swing out so that I've got access to the fixing screw here on the plate. Alright, there's our retard gear train gone. Then the shutter of course fires quite nicely with nothing else in there. Let's unhook the main drive spring and lift out the main drive cam. I'm looking at the state of this spring, so I suspect that it was quite exhausted looking at the way that shutter worked, but actually it's only medium exhausted. Those springs lose their set over time, I suppose you'd say. I think they were effectively overdriven. They were being stressed beyond the point that springs would ideally be stressed to, and as a result that they lose their set. Alright, so this synchronising flash sync mechanism here and latch, that can all come off. I'll just cock that, unhook that spring. Two screws here. The shutter blades here are quite marked. Dirt and probably light surface corrosion there. They'll have to be polished. I polished those with Brasso metal polish. Take that off. They're off the moving flash contact. Unset that. Remove this piece. I've got to get this spring unhooked from there. It's always a bugger. It wants to, as you try to pull the spring back to unhook it, it follows you and makes it hard to get to. So I'm just going to hold that back with a tip of a screwdriver so it can't swing across, and then unhook that spring. That's it. And I hardly had to tension that spring at all in order to unhook it. If you just grab the spring and start pulling it back, this lever will follow you and you get to the end of its travel before you can unhook the spring. Let's take that pallet off there. Now that was a bit sticky on there. You probably need a bit of naphtha on there, will probably sort that out. And the springs here, well, this little spring here on the B lever, it's an unusual shape. More commonly you see it hooked around this side of the lever, but there's this pin comes through here for our rangefinder coupling, and I presume because they've got that in that position, they've chose to use a spring hooking onto the lever at this side so that it clears it. But either way, that's going to come off, so we'll just unhook that from the lever. Of course it automatically just wants to pop back on. That's better. Get that screw out. There we have it, and that spring is on that lever. It's an odd looking thing. You see that with its curved over end and you'd think that there was something, you know, it was a damaged spring, but it's not. That's its design. The B lever can come off. We have one other very small spring here which is very good at getting away, so I'm going to hold a screwdriver over the centre of it so that it can't get away while I unhook it. There it is. It did try to jump off, but it couldn't go anywhere. That's as far as we go with the front of the shutter. Got to remove the stuff from the back of the shutter next. It's better. I've got my all-purpose block of wood here. 3 screws hold this ring on the back. 2 of them are large rounded heads on those screws. One of them near the flash contact is a small countersunk head screw. So I have to be careful with the positioning of that one because obviously it's like that for a reason. Let's pop those 3 screws aside. They are the same thread. And what have we got? Oh, we've got a retainer ring. Then we've got our settings lever for setting the flash sync speed or the delay timer, self timer. From the back, 3 screws hold the mechanism plate into the shutter case. The shutter case lifts off. Of course there's no aperture, no diaphragm aperture in the case because that's in the lens. This plate's a bit dirty and marked looking. I'll have to see how that cleans up. I may remove that plate and clean it and put it back. Generally you don't have to, but if oils have got in here and underneath that plate, you can clean the front surface, but after it's been sitting somewhere warm long enough, the oil will seep out from the back and be there to cause you grief. And here's our shutter blades, and I'm just looking to make sure that they are in the order I would normally expect them to be. And they are. There are 6 blades because this is a cover blade. In this position. blade 5, 4, 3. Now 2 is a special shape. You see it's cut out more at the back here. And that's to clear the shaft that comes through here. Let's see if I can get my tweezers under that, lift it off. There's 1. And there's our mechanism plate, pretty bare. From the top we've got 3 screws that hold the lens tube in place. That centre piece is called the lens tube. Two of the screws are the same length. All of these screws are quite tight, by the way. And this screw here is slightly longer, probably 1/4 millimetre longer, because it retains this plate, and that plate holds the main drive spring. If you mix those screws up, you'll end up with a screw sticking out of the bottom of the mechanism plate, which will foul shutter blades, and a short one where the long one will be, which makes it exceptionally easy to strip the thread out. Right, let's unhook this. This is the blade actuating ring, and it's quite sticky. That's a phone call from me, back shortly. Okay, back to this. Let's have a look at this mechanism plate. Yeah, it's a bit dirty. Things don't move as freely as they should do. They're not bad. The blade actuating ring, I mean, that's got some graphite grease or something on there. It looks like it's gone a bit dry and a bit sticky looking. And the lens tube, of course, there's not much to say about this. The blade actuating ring actually runs around that the centre of the lens tube there, so that's quite a broad area for that thing to run on. And if that whatever's been used to lubricate, that's a bit dry and sticky, that certainly doesn't want to swing freely. Alright, well those parts there, I'll zoom you back out of it. That is the shutter in small pieces, and now I can start the business of cleaning it and putting it back together. I'll start by removing this plate, just because it allows me to do a more thorough job of cleaning the case and any residual oil contamination that might be below that plate. Apart from that, you know, if everything else looked sparkly and good in there, you could leave that in place. Normally I would just check to make sure that the screws were still tight. See, that looks quite good actually. No great shape problem there. Okay, well I'll clean that case, and that's always done with Naphtha, cigarette lighter fluid, and Ronsonol was the stuff I used to get all the time. Actually I buy this in litre at a time from the hardware, and I put it back into these tins because it's much more convenient on the workbench. Right, cotton buds I need.